Good afternoon, everyone. Fortunately, we do not have snow, and we have more people than expected here. The first year I came to this country, I was very much isolated due to my language limitation and my cultural awkwardness. That was 32 years ago, as a young man in early 30. I was taking English as second language class at NYU, and every time around lunch, I was praying with two themes. Number one, let me overcome with the language, English. Number two, help me digest American food. It took almost 5 years until I was able to be friendly with American food. Pizza, hamburger, hot dog. Now I'm madly in love with them. Language, I'm still struggling, but at least my stomach, I'm totally Americanized. But in my first 5 years, the isolation was enormous, and I never felt that I belonged to this culture. It was somewhat acute isolation, but to me, that definitely challenged my existential gravity deeply seated in me that constantly drags me down into depression and aloofness. And I had only one place to go, that was the tabernacle. Because Jesus fully understood my language. Recently, I received a letter from my old patient who was living in New York area. And now this person is a lawyer. And the reason why she wrote me was while she was driving over the Golden Gate Bridge, she was thinking, when I was walking through the George Washington Bridge, I was determined to jump off the bridge. That was around the time she found me and began to do therapy with me. And she wrote, Dr. Kim, while I was almost standing on the cliff and about to jump off the cliff, you were there to listen to me with your passionate heart. Just listening to her, she said, helped me. And I'm not sure that was me, but at least the power from somewhere, since we are believers from God, must have held her tightly to bring her back to this normal world. She was not alone, but she was constantly lonely and isolated amongst the people. And that isolation, that loneliness, apparently was killing her. We all have these moments, and somewhat prolonged period of time, we feel lonely and we are even alone. Throughout these pandemic years, we've been somewhat isolated from each other, from our own goal, from our loved ones. And this pandemic season apparently isolates us. And even the elderly people, they die alone. While they are married over 70 years, the one spouse is sick but not being able to reach out with her hands and has to be reported with the sad news that your husband and your wife just passed away. We experienced these miserable stories throughout the past year, and probably this year a little bit more. And this pandemic season apparently isolates us, and we know what it is like. Today's gospel talks about the lepers who are socially isolated by the Mosaic law. This isolation is not that is beautifully described in the Bible. It is detrimentally threatening the existential beings who are social. Our brain is the social brain. If we are isolated, our brain begins to be functioning disorderly. We begin to lose the sense of language. We begin to lose the capacity to be empathic. Our capacity to love one another is going astray. And we even do not know how to interpret others due to this isolation. Even we, as we saw from the movie Outcast, we began to anthropomorphize. We begin to make the valuable as human beings. We begin to have hallucination. Eventually, we die from the loneliness. Especially the young infants, without the warm mother's touch, they die. They are deprived from love, then they immediately die, painfully. It is just like a sun is moving away from the earth. Then all the creatures on earth, they die. We all die. We need warm human touch because we are mammals. Isolation, aloneness, they are the social diseases the contemporary people are struggling with. We are good at hiding behind mass media, computer, and this phone. We are all good at. And we claim that I am fine with that. Just like my priest friends who are photographers. He says, I can live without a wife, but not without my computer. Yeah, especially young generation. They make money by sitting behind the screen. They make social connections through the chattings and emails. But we somehow are used to avoiding the warm human connection. That's where we are living. Jesus was keenly aware of the situation where the lepers were situated. Due to the Mosaic law, they were claimed, they are permanently verdicted. Once they are verdicted as this having leprosy, the skin diseases, that's the end of it. It is just like once the dementia, Alzheimer's are sitting in your brain, that's the end of it. There's no turning back. You are gradually isolated from these love connections. They were isolated. They were entirely annihilated from the regular society. Then what would have happened in their brains? Apparently, psychotic mind became in charge of these people. Psychotic minds, due to the loneliness and even aloneness, the observable isolation. They are basically withdrawn from the loved people, but more serious one that is professionally called the regressed ego is once you regress from your loved ones, at some point your mind is deprived by the psychosis, and finally you become withdrawn from all the feelings and meanings of your life. You become a dumb, isolated, aloof, non-feeling entity. You become just a material. You are eating stuff just like a mouth, but no human warm connection is there. Because this person is not able to feel who he or she is. Not only feeling for others, but feeling for himself or herself. That's the disease caused by the aloofness, isolation, and that's what the lepers were situated. Today we read two kinds isolations. One, lepers isolation, and another one, Jesus isolation. Lepers were verdicted to live away from the regular society, from their own family members, their own friends, their own old memories. They were forced to live away from them. They were desperate. They simply wanted to die. Jesus chose to go to the desert. Loneliness, aloneness, depression, whatever way you want to put, apparently this isolation damages our brain that is social. But the people who can survive from loneliness, who can make themselves better person and more mature person and deeper person from the loneliness, they know the secret. The people who do not have the connection with God, they eventually die. The people who have a strong connection with God, they survive. They survive from the Auschwitz gas tank. They survive from the outcast accidents and deserted in a desert. And even they survive from all the misunderstandings imposed upon them amongst the people due to their tie with God. Jesus was able to go to the desert. Lepers were forced to go to the desert. They were suffering, and Jesus was being recharged. Loneliness, in many times, they are the gifts. And aloneness, even though it can be pain-causing, but we need that. And God knows how to make us clean. If you want it to be clean, if you want it to be healed from your own deeply seated aloofness and loneliness, then try to accept the hands being reached out from Jesus. Jesus knows how to utilize our loneliness. Because in the end, that's the only place we become healed. And we need this loneliness, this isolation, and this desert. Apparently, amongst many diseases, Jesus has given us the divine disease that is called the solitude. We all feel lonely, and we are confused with this loneliness with our soul hunger that is seeking constantly for God's presence in us. And this lonely place is never been quenched by human comfort. That is the place only comforted by God. And we all have this desert within us. When we are confused with this desert, and when we take it as only the sign of depression, then we may misread it. This divine depression is the place where we encounter God, and from there, God recreates us. So listen to the voice of God. Be clean, and I am recreating you from this desert.